for him to come today, and I'm really, really happy that you have agreed to speak with us and for us on the topic of interdisciplinary programs developed at US. And he's going to share his vision with us. So please give a warm welcome to Dr. Sasaki.
Thank you so much. I want to definitely thank Mikamoto Sanchez for inviting me, and congratulations for creating a graduate student club.
He was there, but it just needed to be
for
revived.
revitalizing,
There you go.
for adding life to
Yeah.
a graduate student club that was there on paper, but wasn't populated, wasn't actually
Right, exactly.
inhabited.
Yeah.
So that's a lovely deal. To give you a little bit of history about this whole thing, Mika came and asked me if I would provide a talk, and so I expected this to be something that was kind of informal, and she just suggested I talk for 45 minutes to an hour and then have a discussion. And so when I saw the delightful posters that Glenn created,
No, she did.
Oh, that you created, wonderful, thank you
He
again for that.
disseminated.
Got it. So you created the lovely poster, and then Glenn disseminated it widely, and suddenly it's a colloquium. And then all of a sudden I'm starting to think, wow, the pressure's on. So it moves from being, a informal discussion to a colloquium until I actually looked up the word colloquium. And so in academics, really it comes from co. So it's basically to speak with, right? And so really, it's where the term colloquial comes from. So that gave me took a lot of pressure off. That was nice. Oh, it could be it could still be informal. It could still be this kind of conversation that we're having. And then, of course, I looked at the second definition, which was the academic definition, which is that it's a formal talk given by. So this is going to be something in between. And what I thought I'd do is talk for half an hour to 45 minutes, somewhere in there, and then start a discussion so that this can actually be a colloquy, where we're actually discussing back and forth together, because that's kind of how I thrive, and move from there. So interdisciplinarity. Interdisciplinarity is this really, really cool thing. And before we even start thinking about interdisciplinarity, we have to think about disciplinarity, right? Like, what is it that creates a discipline? And then when we start thinking about what is it that creates a discipline, we have to start thinking about epistemology, the construction of knowledge. How is knowledge constructed? How do we build upon the shoulders of the people who came before us, and how do we create new knowledge? And then when we start thinking about epistemology, when we start thinking about how we create new knowledge in each discipline, then all of a sudden we have different types of knowledge construction. We have that going on all over this university. We have it in the business department, we have it in religious studies, we have it in the Master's in Divinity, we have it in English and general education. And of course we have it also in psychology, and we each do it slightly differently. And there's this idea, you've all heard this parable, this trope, of all of the blind men who want to understand elephantness. What is it that creates an elephant? And so you have a cadre of blind men kind of feeling different parts of the elephant. Oh, an elephant, feeling the trunk of the legs of an elephant. Oh, an elephant is like a palm. It's rough and it's wide and it's round and it's like a tree. Another might feel the tail. No, it's like a small string. Another might feel the tusk and tell it's very strong and sharp, curved. And so we have all these different things, and no one really gets a picture of elephantness. In 1998, American biologist Edward Wilson revitalized a term, much in the same way that you all revitalized the graduate student club. Revitalized a term that had been long out of use, a classical term called consilience. And the idea of consilience is that all areas of knowledge production can come together and create this unity of knowledge. And there's this idea that for any of us to really know reality, for any of us to really know elephantness, What we have to have is multiple disciplines coming at the elephant from different angles, through their particular lenses, with their particular biases and blind spots, with their particular ability to look deeply through their particular lenses. And it's this classical idea that through knowledge production in multiple areas, we can have this unified knowledge of the world. So in 1998, biologist Edward Wilson comes out and says, this is a lovely idea, but because of the balkanization of academia, because we each have our little tower, and we each have our specialization, we each have our specialized language, our jargon, that it becomes incredibly difficult for one discipline to cross over and communicate with another discipline. And one of the things that makes it incredibly difficult is how, even if we're using the same language to talk about something, that we might be talking about something completely different. Like, consider this university. Consider how the word mindfulness has really just, it's one of the ways where Buddhism has entered the like mainstream understanding. And from any particular discipline, when we use the term mindfulness, it means something completely different. And even if we're using the same language, we might be viewing different parts of an elephant. We might not be understanding one another. So that's kind of where I'm coming from a philosophy of knowledge perspective, from this perspective of what makes a discipline, how the incredible difficulty that we're faced with when we have disciplines start to cross over to one another formally. Yet informally, it's this really, really cool deal. Informally, what we get to do is we get to play with things like, interdisciplinarity at this university. Most of you know that right now what we're doing is we're going through WASP reaccreditation. We're going through a process, thanks to our president, thank you for being here, of re-envisioning and redefining who we are, where we've been, where we want to go, and how do we get there. And part and parcel of all that is this idea of rather than being a collection of nation states in our departments, how do we actually collaborate together? And when we're collaborating together, how do we know we're talking about the same thing when we're using the same language, but we might actually be experiencing, envisioning, thinking, feeling things that are different? One of the ways that it's happened with the undergraduates is Dr. Janice Gore has started piloting these interdisciplinary courses for the undergraduates. These are marvelous. You may or may not have heard of these classes. Classes such as there's an environmental leadership course. That's just phenomenal. There was a World War I course that was history, literature, and art. Environmental leadership was environmental science. I believe literature, and I forget what the third thing was. There was a third element too. In terms of academia, the history of consilience really also finds itself in the idea of a liberal arts degree. Students can come here and major in general studies if they like, and that's kind of our version of liberal studies. And one of the reasons why we value liberal studies is this idea that we can take all of these different knowledge productions, all these, like an undergraduate can kind of visit different nation states in his or her academic journey as an undergraduate, so that kind of forming his or her own kind of idea, broad understanding of a way of seeing the world. So what does this mean for graduate students? Well, one of the really, really cool things about this university, that in my experience, and granted, I don't know every department from the inside out. I don't know, but the departments I do know very well, of course, mine by force. The divinity program, just because we're right next to each other. Also, thanks to their efforts, the bridge programs through kind of English and ESL that kind of help prepare graduate students for all of our programs. religious studies to some degree, but very much as a very much as I feel like I'm kind of on the outside looking at religious studies as a psychologist, but certainly wanting to understand. And one of the things that really strikes me about this university is that every student and faculty member that I've interacted with, and really everyone who's involved with this university that I've gotten to know, my sense is that we're all here because we all want one thing. We all want one thing. And that one thing is we all want for ourselves and for those around us to reduce suffering and increase happiness. And that's remarkable. That's remarkable for a university to be pulled together with this. So if we look at our new way of kind of looking at our principles, our guiding principles of community, compassion, and character. Thank you. And I was going to throw in consilience. Community, compassion, and character. And the different ways that we understand that through all the different lenses. I mean, one of the things that we have Monica Sanford in the house, and the way that she and the president were able to pull together and do all of these kind of conversations over the summer and into the early fall with all the stakeholders, members of the temple, students, faculty, staff. Alumni, and to really kind of understand that to take all of these ways of viewing where are we and where do we want to go, and narrow it down and capture it into these 3 C's of character, compassion, and community. How do we as an organization get together? How do we as individuals? How do we build character, and what kind of character do we want to build? How do we increase compassion in a world that seems to be driven by so much greed and suffering? If I think about every single discipline that we have, every single one could be looked at through the lens of decreasing suffering and increasing happiness. Even if you think about skills building, some of the wonderful projects in the business program, building numeracy, like tax numeracy in the community. What an important thing for underserved, low-income people in the community in terms of how do I keep from giving away more dollars that my family desperately needs to feed itself, clothe itself, shelter itself. How do I keep more of that from being taken by the government and get my rights met? In religious studies, how do we understand the construction of meaning and purpose, and how do we encourage that? It may not be the practical aspects of that in terms of certainly when it's filtered down to divinity in an MDiv program. How do we help people who are currently suffering? Even in the English, which is undergraduate or bridge, increasing literacy, increasing ability to navigate a world, navigate an academic world. So I come in. This is my third year here, my third fall here. So 2 falls ago, I show up here, bright-faced, naive. Having been an adjunct at USC, and in a place where it's really easy to become lost in a sea of faces. And I come here into this tiny community that since then has grown over 300%, and I'm realizing, wow, there's so much potential here. There's so much amazing stuff that we can do. Right, my mind becomes ablaze with fire. Like I start thinking about things like wow. could we create an MDiv MFT program? Wouldn't that be a really amazing combination? Wouldn't that be this beautiful thing? And of course, as soon as an MBA MFT program, for all the marriage family therapists, actually for all of the people in mental health, so many of them are interested in doing things like having a private practice. But how many of them have any business skills at all? None. Very, very few, really. I'm exaggerating. There's so many who go through an MFT program or an MDiv program who have this vision of creating a nonprofit. Right? I have conversations with students all the time where they say things like, I want to create the next Amnesty International in terms of that's driven by Buddhist principles. Wow, what a great vision! What better to do something like have a combined MBA in nonprofit organization, nonprofit management, and a chaplaincy degree. Of course, as soon as you start talking to people about that, then you realize, wow, there's a lot of obstacles. and as soon as you get a lot of obstacles, then it starts. The tendency is for one to kind of put it in the back burner, right? And just go, oh, well, let's let that percolate. Let's let that kind of filter out. Maybe there's more to that in the future. Things like time constraints, to be able to do an MDiv, MFT, 6 years. Really, that's a really long time to wait to postpone directly intervening in people's lives with more time. It's such a give and take, right? Similar deal with an MDiv, MBA, or MFT, MBA. So that may or may not be possible. That may or may not be desirable. That may or may not be marketable. However, what certainly is this idea of further collaboration between departments, in particular classes, and one of the things that we're really looking toward at this university, both top down and bottom up. So both from the president's vision coming in here, as well as what boots on the ground, what so many of the faculty members, chairs, kind of want ground up, and we're kind of converging in the middle as we're looking at this kind of strategic plan of where do we want to go? How do we see ourselves moving into the future? And already we've dabbled in some experiments at the graduate level. Undergraduate it's a lot easier. At the graduate level, dabbling in some experiments of having some cross-pollination happen and how rich that can be. I'm really glad that Brock is here. Hi, Tina. I'm really glad that Brock is here because he was in one of the courses over the summer that was deliberately created as a cross-pollination of the marriage family therapy program and the MDiv program, right? And he was in a class. We created a class called Psych 650, which was a special topics class, topics in Buddhist psychology, and there was a class on we created a class on Buddhist psychology and addiction over the summer, where there were students that are working toward a clinical degree in the relief of suffering and increase of happiness, and the students are working towards a chaplaincy degree for the same purpose, and how their case study work ended up being incredibly rich. Like I was talking with Brock and others in the class afterwards, and at one point, one of the things that they're asked to do is was to do case study work, to take what they're learning and go and interview people who are in recovery. Right? And so what they did was they interviewed people that are currently in recovery. And one of the things, and Brock, I'll invite you later on to talk more about this if you like in our discussion. But one of the things that came up over and over are the four students who were paired kind of across disciplines with each other had this particular phenomenal experience that was more than and I chose the word phenomenal on purpose. This kind of phenomena, this occurrence that's more than the sum of its parts. Where even just noticing the types of questions being asked, the types of information being gathered, the type of lens being seen through, the students didn't use these words, but the felt sense I got was simultaneously alien and delightful. And isn't that part of what we get to do? Isn't that part of what we get to do in terms of interdisciplinarity? Especially as we move toward greater programs. One of the things that I'm really, really grateful to Dr. Gainey for this year is the launching of the THD program and jumping through all the hoops for WASC, preparing us in the future of my dream of creating a PhD program toward clinical licensure in the state of California for clinical psychologists in counseling psychology. I'll talk about that in a minute if you like. In Buddhist psychology and trauma, there's no such program. I think it would be incredibly attractive. And as we move in this direction, it seems to me that there's so much. The first day I meet chair of the business department, the first day I meet him, he reaches across the kind of transnational boundaries of like business and psychology and says, "You're the man I want to talk to. I want to talk to you about the kinds of research that we can do with mindfulness in business. How can we combine what the best that psychology has to offer, the best that business has to offer, and you know, on our first meeting, we start having this really rich discussion about what does mindfulness even mean in business, right? Is it my term was is it just ad copy? His term was is it just vaporware? Right? Something that we're selling that has no there, to quote Gertrude Stein talking about Texas. So, or is there something about the use of mindfulness that can actually overlaps in the wiggle room that we may have, and individual willingness and kind of attachment to particular courses may constrain this, but this is in the area of the electives, and so that's fairly limited in every program, and so that's kind of the outside constraint. And that's where the second level comes in, which is the way that Vic kind of stratified it. The second level of co-creating new programs together, as opposed to like taking the degrees that we already have and kind of sticking them together with Stickum, creating new programs together. For instance, a sustainability course. If we had a sustainability degree or certification through this university, I would imagine it would be a shame not to have it include all the disciplines that we have at this university. I think it would be a shame not to have a strong religious studies perspective, a strong chaplaincy perspective, a strong psychology perspective, a strong business perspective, and also a strong general studies kind of humanities perspective. Right? I think that all that combination would only make that sort of course or a sort of program that much richer. So this is where we kind of, right, we're constrained by the electives, and then we're constrained by, is it feasible? But let's dream and then see what we can do. Absolutely, thank you.
So, before I came here, I was in a double degree program at the University of Nebraska for a master's in architecture and a master's in community and regional planning. And they're both 42-unit degrees. They fixed it such that you could get them both in 3 years with 66 units and a thesis that counted for double. A little longer thesis, but still would count for both. And it was extremely rewarding on the one hand and a little constraining on the other because of the issue of electives. So you just take all the core architecture courses and all the core planning courses, and then there's no room left over for, as a student, to pursue other interests, except, of course, in the thesis project, where you could basically go to town, as long as they're committee degrees. But it was a wonderful program, but I didn't finish it because I ran up against two classes that weren't ever offered. And the architecture folks on that side were like, oh, well, planning usually offers that. Planning's like, no, that's an architecture class. So it was quite an interesting, as a student, an interesting experience going through that. But the other thing that I wanted to point out was that one of those degrees, which was the planning degree, was by its nature interdisciplinary because there is no undergraduate degree in planning. Everybody who came into that program came from somewhere else. And that made it really fascinating. So there are multiple ways that we can do interdisciplinarity, even within planning as a discipline, all by itself. But because you can't get an undergraduate degree in it, you gather people from elsewhere. And MDiv is like that. You can't get an undergraduate degree, divinity. I mean, maybe you can do religious studies or something else, but everybody's coming from somewhere else. So I'm wondering how that can make us think about our admissions criteria into some of these programs. If we really want to encourage interdisciplinarity, are we going to demand that they have a degree in that discipline before coming to a graduate program, or are we going to make space for them? And how can we do that? And how can we also make sure that the academic rigor is maintained?
It's definitely a struggle.
Yeah, so I really like to commend this university for offering an MBA class pertaining to nonprofit management. And what's fascinating and surprising about that class is that the class is comprised of mostly MBA students.
Is that right?
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
One business student, and he was really embarrassed to ask some of the venerables about meditation.
Wow. Wow.
Another serious point I want to make is that when I first started here, I liked the psychology department, and the fact that it housed a two-track, multicultural as well as business psychology.
Yes.
And I'm in the MDiv program.
Yes.
So I voiced to our chairs in the past, is there any way that we could collaborate with the psychology department?
Yes.
Because as MDiv students, once we graduate, we are charged to do CPUs, an internship, to be a board certified chaplain.
Right.
And that is something that is required of us. And I noticed that psych students are also required to do 700 hours of practicum. So I thought maybe that if we could collaborate in that arena prior to students graduating, they can get some, hands-on experience. But I think one of the problems that came about was that the university needs someone in-house to kind of oversee that.
Right.
So maybe we can continue this conversation.
Absolutely. One of the things that Dr. Lee and I have been working on kind of separately was the creation of a community wellness center, and that we're both brainstorming. If I allow myself to dream big, the building on the corner, we'd love to take over the bottom floor, just make that the wellness center, make it be something that where whether it's called the Shilai Wellness and Buddhist counseling, I don't know what it would be called. However, have it be something where both chaplaincy students and MFTs can kind of work through, and that way have it be a training site. It's something that both of us had to back burner because of the WASP visit and other things, but it's definitely high on our radar. It's certainly something that we're both wanting to do. There are also courses that that Victor and I have started to talk about briefly that we both think will benefit from more kind of cross-pollination, just like with the Buddhist psychology and addictions course. Things like a group course, things like apparently the chaplaincy students require to have group process provided for them. And the lovely thing about the idea of creating a clinic is that we can, Dr. Lee's original idea was to go the nonprofit route and really try and get grants to kind of drive it. I'm coming at it more from the for-profit route and then build a nonprofit inside of it. which is a new model that's in California, was piloted by a private corporation called Experiment in Northern California. And to do that, we'd have to hire first psychiatrists, because that's where a lot of the referrals come through, and then hire both psychologists and marriage family therapists that are licensed, and then those folks are the ones that would kind of be able to supervise. And same thing with chaplaincy. We would basically have to be able to have somebody who's able to supervise chaplaincy students as well. And the nice thing about doing that is then we could have 2 tiers of training in psychology. We'd have doctoral students that are being trained, and then we'd have master's students that are being trained. And the way we would avoid dual roles and boundary problems is that we would have doctoral students who are not from the school, since we don't currently have a doctoral program, and be the ones who are being supervised by someone who's licensed, who's then providing the groups for your students, for the divinity students, because I know that there was a funding problem. There's all sorts of issues, and if we build it into a training model, that would really work out very nicely. So this is stuff that's very exciting that we're in the process of thinking about. Unfortunately, a knee-jerk reaction in the psychology department at University of the West takes a couple of years. So it's slow. It's slow. But we are looking into it, and perhaps we can make it happen faster than that. I would love to. Thank you.
I think it does sound great, and it represents my perspective as a student looking at some programs. I think it requires a lot of cultural change.
Mm-hmm.
So even though, of course, we want things to happen really quickly, it might be good that some of it happens more slowly, because I perceive that there's some mindset changes that need to come back. Actually, directly back to something you said, Monica, which I really appreciate, which has to do with how we view people in admissions and how we view people and where they belong.
Right.
So I think that there's great opportunity, but that it has to be grown carefully.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Because again, it is cultural change, and so even if your knee-jerk reaction was 3 months, maybe everybody else would be ready to work with you again. So again, I think there's a great opportunity here, but I also think there's an opportunity for some students to get lost, because there would be across subgroups, there would be the question of ownership. Well, but that's your student. No, that's your student. So who's going to help that student? Who's going to pay attention when that student wants to write their dissertation, right?
One of the really exciting things in terms of dissertations, I'm already on 2 dissertation committees, and both those students their work is incredibly feeding me. It helps me to better understand this community. It helps me to have kind of the cultural anthropologist, kind of participant observer. And now I get to be like right in the trenches with trying to see through a religious studies perspective at particular things, while it's impossible for me to shed my psychologist's perspective, trying to bracket it for a moment, and kind of doing that, changing lenses every once in a while, and go, ooh, if you look at it this way, it might help. Or let me help me to understand this part, so I can help you with the rigor. And I think the more doctoral programs we grow, the more interdisciplinarity we'll see in terms of what those committees look like. Those committees will start to become incredibly much more diverse. And just like Monica was saying, that certainly in the dissertation or in the theses, that's where so much of let me dive deeply into individual interests can come. Awesome. Yes. Dr. Kim.
Thank you very much for your wonderful talk and promising vision. I believe that this interdisciplinary approach probably make the U.S. unique and give specialty to the United States. I saw that some interdisciplinary approach between institution and institution, but inside the same institution, some departments work together and then march together and then achieve something in terms of interdisciplinary approach that will be very wonderful. Everything has a good and bad side, and this semester when I deal with 2 kinds of academic discipline, as you mentioned, each academic field has their own strong history and tradition. So students really interested in know about both tradition, but the concept, terminology are a little bit different. So they need time to understand and comprehend. So I'm a little bit, behind schedule because I had to talk a lot and then try to provide, better understanding to students. So, I mean, when we put this interdisciplinary process or course, maybe some kinds of courses might be a little bit modulated. So in terms of content, so how much ratio we are going to put to each discipline to students, maybe 50 to 50 or 80 to 20%, depending on that, the students' outcome can be also, a little bit changed.
Absolutely. We're having a wonderful discussion yesterday in our strategic planning meeting, and one of the student representatives was talking with Monica and I and saying, why isn't Buddhism more forefronted? Why isn't there more Buddhism in the coursework? And this sense of what that means for different individuals. Is it Buddhist values? Is it also is it the context of Buddhist values, or is it learning more specifically about Buddhism, right? Similarly, I'm flanked by two perspectives. On the one hand, I have one venerable telling me, if you're just using mindfulness to reduce your depression, or if you're just using mindfulness to reduce anxiety, that's not Buddhism. And then I'm saying, well, what would it take? What would it take for it to be Buddhism? And then he says to me, well, it has to be in the context of the goal of escaping the cycle of birth, old age, death, rebirth. If you're not doing it to escape that, then it's just like any other self-medication. It's not Buddhism. It's something else. On the other hand, I have another person, a reverend, saying to me, breathe out. Notice the little bliss. I think that little J, that little pop, that little smile that comes after every breath. And once you do that, and then it disappears in milliseconds, do it again. Do it again. And saying that this is the beginning of the understanding of all this of through this just little thing that can happen. And through just this little thing, even if I'm just teaching this little thing to trauma survivors, says that what you're doing is you're introducing Buddhism into their lives. So I'm straddling these two perspectives, right? On the one hand, that's not Buddhism. On the other hand, this is part of that, right? And the reason I'm giving you this story is that of course, boots on the ground, as an instructor, what you're wanting is clear guidance. Is it 20/80? Is it 50/50? What sort of blend of East and West are we doing? Is there a clean, well researched and well established algorithm? Let me plug in. If I plug in this much West and then this much East and let them blend a little bit right here at the margins, how do we do that? And the answer is I don't know. I don't know. All I know is that I'm straddled, I'm pulled in these two directions, right? Where, and similarly in this sense as well, where how each instructor does that. We can certainly provide guidance and we can provide models for how that happens. Another example is that the problem with many marriage family therapy programs is that they'll have an ethics class, and that they'll have a multicultural class, and that they'll have a mission statement and a vision in the program that talks about multiculturalism and ethical practice. And yet multiculturalism and ethical practice is one class. one class for multicultural, one class for ethics, and then we'll just leave it behind and then work on these other things with maybe a little bit of lip service, right? Where just and it's such a challenge to have that filter through the entire program. And one of the ways to do that is is something that we've been very, very strong with at the master's level and behind it at the undergraduate level, which is at the graduate level really conceptualizing, and this is something that Monica and Michael Ortel have been incredibly helpful with us with kind of the self-study. We're really conceptualizing the journey from entry, from admission, all the way to graduation as this narrative journey, and how each course that we have, each interaction that students have with faculty kind of adds to that, and how do these courses fit together, and where does multiculturalism come in, where do ethics come in? Can we have it sprinkled throughout, and it can be stronger in others, emphasized more in some classes, a little bit less in others, and as they go through, they get this kind of consistent journey, this consistent narrative, this consistent story, where it builds and builds and builds, climaxes, and then done. Exactly. And it's harder to do at the undergraduate level because but I still think it's possible. I still think it's possible. So that's what I'm hearing you request is like. The way that I'm internalizing your request, Dr. Kim, is that basically, just as we've poured so much energy into the master's program that way, let's examine with the faculty and with the students how best to envision a narrative from recruitment or enrollment, admissions, all the way through to graduation at the undergraduate level.
I have a few points I would like to make in this gathering that we have today. I definitely enjoyed the points that you have made, Professor Sasaki, which is definitely enlightening to me. I do want to kind of bring some ideas back to what the earlier discussion was, and I kept thinking about the trade-offs that were pointed out earlier, and the fact that there's only so much time and so much resources that can be devoted to the students in terms of courses. So students who come to this university to get a degree, they have expectations, just like their parents have expectations of what they are getting for the degree.
Right.
So for that, we have responsibilities to be able to give them those basic requirements of what that degree means, whether that be in psychology, whether that be in business or in religious studies. And so there's no escaping the fact that, in my mind, most of the content that will be delivered to them will be of the more traditional sort by extension. I do see that there is room, perhaps in terms of interdisciplinary coursework, although I do think that it doesn't have to be one or the other. In my mind, there can be diversity. So there will be certain students who really simply want to be very specialized. And so they only want to take finance courses, or they only want to learn about Buddhism in America, something along those lines. So that's okay, right? So to have a room for them to do that. But then there will be others that will be very widespread in terms of the interests. And somebody like myself, I had a double degree myself on undergraduate studies, actually a triple. But that's because I had my interests were very broad. I wanted to be able to examine engineering and business and economics and so forth. So we need to have opportunities for people that are of that mindset to be able to do that, while still at the same time give those more traditionally specialized minded students to be able to pursue what they want also. I think we have a responsibility to the parents for that. Another point I want to make is respect to the fact that, yes, if you have a class that's supposed to be interdisciplinary and then you have issues with respect to teaching, okay, who's going to be teaching that? And also you have issues with respect, okay, is it going to count towards both degrees? One of the things that I think can be used to overcome that is to think beyond coursework in the classroom and think about activities outside of the classroom. So, this university have been in discussions and have committees about co-curricular activities. And so, we want to emphasize things like service. so service projects. So if a service project can be defined in a broad enough way, then that can lead to students and faculty and others of different disciplines to participate in that service project in a way that is not necessarily part of a particular coursework, while still be able to bring in an actual problem that needs to get solved, and then different experts of different fields and different people from different perspectives to bring in their own, what they have to bring to the problem to be solved, and then solve it together. So, so my point there is coursework is fine in terms of looking at potential ways to have interdisciplinary courses, but it's possible also to look at other ways beyond the classroom to be able to achieve that same goal anyways. So in my mind, education is not just about the coursework in the classes. So if we expand our view in terms of looking at what education means, and include those things that are outside the classroom, I think we can maybe also get somewhere in terms of fomenting interdisciplinary mindset around the university.
Absolutely. One of the things that you weren't here at the very beginning, and so I wasn't able to kind of give you a big nod and a shout out to you and your work with increasing numeracy with the tax returns and doing taxes for the community. And one of the things that you kind of talked to me about when we originally met was this whole idea of financial counseling, right? And what can the psychology department, how can the psychology department and the business department work together to provide, to basically outline and provide, to teach and provide, show the best practices for financial counseling. And so for projects like that, this is clearly an outreach project, it's clearly a community project. Projects like this, I think, are incredibly rich. So I'm so glad that you mentioned service projects that not only individual students can do, but departments can collaborate upon. That'd be lovely.
And the key thing about that is it focuses the mind. You know, we actually have a goal, we actually have a problem to be solved, then the issue is you're not really necessarily thinking about, okay, well, how to apply psychology or how to apply this. There's simply things that need to be solved, and then you try to figure out how to solve it.
Right,
Yes.
absolutely.
I'd be wrong if I didn't take the opportunity to word out the prison initiative.
Oh, yes, yes.
By the way.
Shout out to
So
the
we do have the prison
amazing.
initiative where we haven't grown that much yet, but we are looking for interdisciplinary volunteers because we could use volunteers from the School of Business. They don't have to want to go to prison to teach. We need help with our business setup. So we do, and we have had some people from your department come and talk to us and, approach working with us. So
What initiative?
blurt that up. The prison initiative, the University of
Oh,
West Prison
prison.
Initiative, where some of our students go to some of the California state prisons and teach classes, and they're kind of interdisciplinary because they are part a little bit Buddhist religion, but they're really academic classes. Like the prisoners earn units for taking those classes through our School of Extension, with thanks to Glenn. So that is an opportunity, and we've just been very quiet lately because we're doing some of our own business forming. But it is my intention that I'm going to come back knocking on people's doors. You and I talked for like 2 minutes one day, right? Because you were very busy.
I think that would be a great opportunity to
So I would be wrong not to blurt that out.
practicum.
Right, right.
I think it should be more advertised.
Right, and we just haven't gotten out there as much as we would like to because we're a small group of everybody is part-time. But actually, I also wanted to address, like when you're talking, I really see what you're saying, which is if you are teaching in the School of Business and somebody wants to be an accountant, the university has a responsibility to make sure they leave there as a fully qualified accountant, as long as they do their schoolwork, they pass classes, right? But then I think in conjunction with that, like you said, there's the project work, there's the opportunity for electives and interdisciplinary, which they can take advantage of or not. And then I also will say that I think there's something in the way in which a person teaches a class, which not every instructor will do, but the way in which somebody delivers a class makes that class either an interdisciplinary experience or not. And it either makes it an experience that's that includes Buddhism or it doesn't, without ever an instructor telling you they're a Buddhist or not. So I do think that there are possibilities there.
Absolutely.
And then I think though, if this is something that University of the West decides to use to differentiate, then we have to leave, as a university, even though I'm a student of science, we have to leave a place of comfort for a little while, and we have to be uncomfortable with the fact that we are promoting ourselves as interdisciplinary, and that we are distancing ourselves from not being interdisciplinary if that's what we think is our future. And that is an uncomfortable place to be. But discomfort leads to growth typically. So anyway.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you. I have to give a shout out to Dr. Lewis Lancaster, where the whole idea of the prison initiative started out as a utopian interdisciplinary dream. And the first course that was offered in order to kind of train people was again it was Dr. Jane Orimura and Reverend Danny Fisher together, kind of creating this cross-discipline course to prepare people to do this project. And so this was something that was birthed out of this interdisciplinarity itself, and I'm so happy that you all are still carrying the flame for that. It's a beautiful thing.
We're just in a quiet period right now because we have a lot of work we're doing. But we'll be
And I
back.
hope it will grow, and I
It will.
hope
It will.
this university will grow. I know, some of us are going to be graduating and leaving, but we still want this university to grow. And having the niche, maintaining the niche of having the Buddhism as the foundation upon which the programs are built. Because if I may speak for myself, I came here because Buddhists were teaching. I could have gone anywhere else, but I came here. Number one, it's in California, and then the Buddhists actually practicing Buddhists were teaching. So that's why I came here, and I hope you will, develop and grow that way. And that's our dream, I think, all of our dream to have. This school is important for all of us here, and that's why we're here, I think. Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Sasaki. Some people had to leave because of time constraint, but it's wonderful, and you exceeded our expectation of being a great speaker. Thank you so much, and I hope we can continue this conversation as students and faculties and staff members. Next month, November 14th, we're having Dr. Tina and Victor speak with us and for us to continue our theme of interdisciplinary programs.
Wonderful.
So please come.
Thank you. Thank you.